We want to look at the various forms of governance that exist around the world. Let us not confuse forms of governance and models of governance. Models of governance basically deals with the frameworks of governance. Then forms of governance now implies the execution of those frameworks. So when we talk of forms of governance, we are more or less concerned about how decisions are made and how they are executed. While in model, we are basically concerned about the structures or the frameworks that are being put in place to govern. Their execution is now what we call forms of governance. So we want to look at the various forms of governance that exist in various societies and governments around the world. The first one that we want to look at is called dictatorial governance. In this discussion, we want to look at the various variants or various types or typologies of dictatorial governance. And then we want to conclude our discussion by looking at some of the strategies that dictatorial governance employ to survive. Why survive? Because normally it is not the best form of governance, and therefore certain strategies have to be employed for it to survive. A dictatorship is basically a form of governance which is characterized by a leader or a group of leaders which holds government powers with a few to no limitations on them. The dictator, for that matter, controls by influencing and appeasing the inner cycle while repressing any opposition or critic. And such repression might include or might be extended to rival political parties. It might also involve the use of armed resistance and also purging of disloyal members, so that it requires total compliance. Now, these regimes or governance regimes, they operate through authoritarian control, and they replace democratic processes with bureaucratic orders. In other words, leaders that are appointed, not elected. And because they're appointed, they're largely answerable to the appointing authority, and they work according to the terms and dictates of the bureaucratic authority. Dictators usually resort to force or fraud to gain despotic political power, which they maintain through the use of intimidation, terror, and the suppression of basic liberties. Of course, up to this level, we can visualize what system of governance this actually is, and some of the mechanisms that governors or dictatorial governors employ to maintain themselves. But what is important here is that when we talk of dictatorial governance, it's a governance system that either has one person as the ultimate authority or a small cycle of people that makes day-to-day decisions, oversee the implementation, and they use unorthodox means or sometimes extra constitutional means to impose their will on others. We want to turn to some of the variants, the various types of dictatorial governments that exist around the world. The first one is called authoritarian. Authoritarian is a form of dictatorial governance which is found especially in governmental systems where one single political party dominates the politics of a given country. What then happens in such regimes or such jurisdictions is that the single party honchos, that is, the bureaucrats of that single political party, they dominate political offices. For instance, ministries and other key decision makers in government agencies. They also win tenders in government because they need money to perpetuate their stranglehold on power. And they're the ones that run government enterprises. If there are income generating activities or enterprises that are established by the government, most likely it is the political honchos of single party that dominate those particular offices. While there could be possibility of some opposition parties in authoritarian regimes, but those parties, they have very minimal chance of ever winning an influential position, such as the presidency. This is because several legal hurdles are normally placed before them that make it quite difficult for them to succeed. And therefore, in the process, they end up getting very little votes. Even in some cases, the electoral system is skewed, and even the personnel running such political systems are normally appointed by the ruling party. And again, those individuals that are appointed to serve those political systems, those electoral bodies, ensure that it's not the ruling party that wins. Authoritarian regimes therefore ensure that government critics are either coerced into silence or they are co-opted into government. Coercion here could mean threats and intimidation, frequent arrests, among others. Or in some cases, they can make effort to bring them on board by through financial inducements, so that every critic, every person that comes up to criticize the government is quickly co-opted. The aim is to make the opposition less critical and also unable to mount significant threat or significant political threat to the ruling party. We have several countries within the region that are authoritarian in nature, although they hold elections regularly, but electoral processes are predetermined. The outcome of such processes are determined. Take the case of Uganda, where we have the National Resistance Movement, which came to power in 1986. It has been winning elections each and every year. And every time there's presidential election, the system works with the government to ensure that opposition movement is stifled. And in that case, they cannot match the ruling party. Again, in the neighboring country, we have Tanzania. CCM Chama cha Mapinduzi, again, has been using similar tactics all along to ensure that it retains power. And it uses intimidation, it uses threats, it uses arrest of leading opposition figures to prevent them from contesting elections. This is basically what happened in Tanzania in last year's elections. It was a charade, quite shameful. Police were deployed, and Chama cha Mapinduzi won 98% of the vote. Indeed, democratic societies, it is quite difficult for any political party to win that kind of votes. We have another case in Zimbabwe. The ZANU-PF, again, has been in power for quite some time and also uses all possible means, threats, bribery, among other means, to maintain power. So authoritarianism is characterized more by systems where we have one dominant single political party that lords over on others. The other type or variant of a dictatorial regime or dictatorial governance is the junta. A junta is basically a type of dictatorial regime in which military officers hold power. They determine who will lead the country and also exercise influence over policy. And this form of dictatorship is typically formed by a military coup in which senior officers use the military to overthrow the government. This form of dictatorship is often unstable and average lifespan is about 5 years. They are often ousted by subsequent military coups. And basically, when we talk of a junta, it is basically a dictatorial government that come into place or that is controlled by military leaders. We have several cases in Africa, especially Western Africa, which has been described by political scientists as the coup belt, coup after coup, coup after coup. So these systems, they do not allow elections. Some of them suspend the constitution. Some of them do not have legislative bodies such as parliament. And if they do so, it is manned by military officers. Decisions that are made by military officers and are also implemented by military officers. Civil liberties are trampled upon, and citizens do not have power and are not provided opportunities to make contributions in terms of decisions that are going to affect them. Decisions are made by military rulers and implemented by military rulers. Civilians are meant to see what is going on and not to participate in the decision making of what eventually is implemented by the military regime. Another variant or another type of a dictatorial governance is called personalist. And personalist dictatorship, these are regimes in which all power lies in the hands of a single individual. There is one single individual that dominates everything. And in this type of dictatorship, there is what we call the elite corps. The elite corps is basically a military unit that protects the president. And this military unit is largely composed of very close friends or family members. These dictatorships often emerge either from loosely organized seizures of power or from democratically elected leaders in countries where institutions of governance are quite weak. Personalist dictators typically favor loyalty over competence in their governments and have a general distrust of intelligentsia. Take the case of North Korea, where the current president is a son to the former president and also the grandson again to the former president. In other words, North Korea has been led by the same family for 3 different generations. You go again to Syria under Assad, who came to power in 2000. His father had been the leader before. When the father passed on, the leadership was passed to him. He remained in office until recently, when he was ousted by an insurgency. There are several cases. For instance, Libya under Muammar Gaddafi was also a personalist, in the sense that power concentrated on him, and he was the only one that had the authority to make decisions that affected the nation. We talk again a case of Fidel Castro when he was in power during his time in Cuba. Again, that was another case of a personalist. So we have several cases of this type of leadership or dictatorial governance, and power concentrates basically on the leader. Again, another case that stands out clearly is Eritrea under Issa Afewerki, who came into power in 1993 when Eritrea obtained independence from Ethiopia. He has remained so, and there is no possibility of him leaving the office. He remains family, and any suggestion or any discussion to remove him is often met with intimidation, with force, and violence. So, personalist is a governance system in which leadership is, or the entire power lies in the hands of a single individual. Another important variant of dictatorial regime or dictatorial governance is what we call theocracy. A theocracy is basically a form of governance where a state is ruled by religious leaders or divine guidance, deriving authority directly from a deity. And government officials in these states are considered to be guided by revelation, and therefore the masses consider them infallible. Government leaders are either clergymen or people who are connected to influential members of the clergy. And laws that govern citizens are largely derived from religious texts. In theocratic governance, the rights of citizens in a theocracy is limited, but sometimes it depends on the individual ruler or the theocrat and not necessarily the institution. For instance, if you look at Iran, it's also a theocratic regime. Saudi Arabia is also a theocratic regime. Qatar is also a theocratic regime. Quite a lot of the Gulf nations are theocratic regimes, but these regimes, they have some elements of liberalism, so that when you look at Iran, even though it's a theocratic regime, it permits limited civil liberties. But now when you go to other countries like Saudi Arabia, the liberties are quite completely not there. It looks more of a monarchical institution than, in other words, it combines both monarchy and theocratic arrangement. And in that case, therefore, it becomes difficult for citizens to exercise their political and social rights without intimidation. Some of the cases or countries where theocracy is practiced and which I've mentioned include Iran under the Ayatollahs, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, among a host of other Gulf nations. The leadership are also the religious leaders, and they apply a lot of religious laws in the day-to-day management of the state affairs. Another variant of dictatorial governance is called oligarchy. An oligarchy is a form of power structure where control rests with a small elite group which is distinguishable by wealth, nobility, military, or corporate power. This system is sometimes described as a rule by the few. Why a rule by the few? A rule by the few because the system serves the interests of the elite rather than the public. Oligarchs often maintain power by lobbying. They also own media outlets. They also influence elections. And oligarchies are viewed as challenging to democracy because they focus more on extreme accumulation of wealth. And in doing so, they restrict fair democratic participation in electoral processes as well as in income generation. So that when you have a country where a few people can sit down and decide, or power rotates among friends, among business associates, among political friends, then that becomes oligarchy. Oligarchy is considered dictatorial in the sense that it does not permit universal suffrage as far as contesting electoral offices is concerned. Individuals that contest and individuals that eventually win, sometimes the decisions are made in boardrooms, and voters' participation in electoral processes is merely meant to rubber stamp what has happened. This way, therefore, it becomes quite difficult for citizens to enjoy their rights to election, rather to vote in the right people, and also to hold the elected leaders accountable. The next question that we want to ask ourselves is, how then does dictatorial regimes sustain themselves? What are the survival strategies they employ to maintain power? One of them is through repression. And dictators use state machinery such as secret police, military force, and security apparatus to eliminate or intimidate government critics. When you look at most of the dictatorial regimes, we have official police force, but we also have an official police force. And an official police force is the one that does the dirty work. This is because they are not answerable for any official chain of command. They are answerable to the leader. And it is quite difficult also to apportion them for or to blame them for any particular or to bring them to account, because once their identity is not clear. Again, they use military force. In some cases, they have an elite military unit whose work is to crack down on critics of the system, so that countries or governance systems of governance that is characterized by dictatorship, you'll find, for instance, there are arbitrary arrests. Arbitrary arrests implies people being arrested without any formal charges. Individuals are tortured, and there also widespread surveillance to eliminate perceived enemies. People do not enjoy personal freedoms. Dictators resort to purges of opponents or competitors through dismissal, demotion, or execution when corruption fails or a rival becomes too powerful. So that within the system, if an individual within the system is becoming outspoken and appearing to challenge the status quo, then dictatorial regimes will rain on them, dismiss them from offices, they will be demoted to lower and less influential positions, and in some cases, some are killed. Because if left, the regime feels that they might become so much powerful and therefore topple the regime. So repression is one of the most strategies that these regimes employ to sustain themselves in power. The other one is media censorship. By media censorship, we imply restricting what the media can post or can put to the public. Independent media is therefore suppressed, it is subverted or replaced to censor information and control the narrative. Real media is directed on what to report and what not to report. And sometimes what it reports, it is directed on how and when to report it. Dictators also foster extreme political polarization and creation of a fear of external or internal enemies. They manufacture fear within the state so that leaders or citizens then do not in any way engage in activities that appear to question or challenge the leadership. Sometimes they use force, violence on citizens, or even if individuals are arrested, they are tortured, and to send a message to other critics that are yet to be caught. So that the entire aim is to spread fear among citizens so that they do not speak out, even when they're not satisfied with what is going on in the state. And dictators also project themselves as the only solutions to chaos and instability. In other words, they create problems. After creating problems, then they project themselves as the only people who can resolve such problems. They also control the truth by silencing independent media and a strict provision of public goods like the internet that help people to organize. So that in these regimes, it can be quite difficult even to communicate even to network, because internet is either cut off, controlled, or severely censored to the point that individuals or citizens are not able to use the internet freely. Sometimes what you post must be censored first, or sometimes when you can use media and what you can use internet for is highly censored to the extent that therefore people feel discouraged from using it to vent their anger. The other strategy that's employed by dictatorial regimes is what we call patronage. And patronage it means ensuring that the select elite that forms a coterie around the leader enjoys good life so that they do not in any way think of challenging the regime. And this they do by extending favors, providing financial rewards, and also what we call spoils. Spoils could be even promises to be appointed, relatives to be appointed, and also being given government tenders. This ensures that the elite have a vested interest in the regime's survival. Because if the regime does not survive, then all those privileges are gone. So they will do as much as they can to ensure that the regime stands. Dictators also build loyalty by creating dependency through state-managed resources. Sometimes they dangle resources to buy loyalty so that individuals that become loyal or regions that become loyal are rewarded with state projects, and those that tend to question the regime are ignored. So that public service, infrastructure, economic support is provided not as a matter of duty to the state or to the leaders, but as a means of buying loyalty and acceptance, as a means of entrenching the survival of the dictatorial class for some time, so that patronage becomes a major factor. Individuals that support the regime are rewarded with government appointments, government businesses. Their relatives are also rewarded. They are also rewarded through infrastructural developments in regions where they come from, so that they remain loyal and acceptable to the regime. The other important strategy that dictatorial regimes employ is what we call manipulation of institutions, such as electoral bodies. Are staged, they are manipulated or abolished. Staged means that if they exist, they do not make independent decisions. Officials that run them are elected or selected by the dictators, and they are given firm instructions on how to work. And the kind of work they do is to favor the ruling class. Legislatures and judiciaries are also packed with loyalists rather than experts, and this will therefore destroys checks on power. Leaders may also gradually abolish or gradually remove unfavorable judges. If certain judges make decisions that go against them, they're removed. They abolish term limits for judges. Rather, such leaders also abolish term limits for themselves so that they can rule forever. They refuse to acknowledge unfavorable election results, and in case they use authorities, they use coercive means to intimidate voters so that electoral processes favor them. A dictator might intentionally stagnate economic or educational development for fear that the changes will empower the masses or a new middle class to challenge them. So people are deliberately rendered poor so that you remain completely dependent on the state for support. The fear is if citizens are empowered economically, educationally, then they become independent. And when they become independent, they can question the state, they can protest, they can seek for the regime change, because empowerment implies they understand their rights and they have the means to educate the masses to ensure that bad governance is eradicated. So there could be a deliberate state neglect of development as a strategy of keeping citizens poor, and in doing so, maintaining them uh, 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 for some time. The last strategy that dictatorial regimes employ is what we call the strategy of cult personality or cult of personality. And dictators often build a heroic or divine image of themselves to appear as the only person capable of leading the nation. They do this by often using imagery and state-sponsored festivals to mobilize support. Dictators also identify a common villain to focus public anger towards as a means of consolidating internal loyalty. They also use propaganda to paint themselves as heroes and indispensable figure in a given nation. For instance, some have holidays, state holidays, national holidays, dedicated either to their birthdays or dedicated to the time they seized power. Others have roads named after them. Others have institutions named after them. Others have statues in various cities and important centers are built in their honor. This is for them to be seen as a cult and to spread the propaganda that a state or a nation will fall if they leave office. This is to create a cult personality and to ensure that uh, 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 citizens are conditioned to actually believe that without them, without the leader, then there's nothing. This is the case that was there in so many countries. Hitler did this, Saddam Hussein did this. In South Korea, rather in North Korea, the current president is doing it. Museveni has been stating it in Uganda time and time again, saying that without him, Uganda is no more. And all these things they are done for purposes of entrenching themselves with power and extending their rule. We have looked at the dictatorial regime and we have discussed important issues around it. I want to suggest that anyone with any question that he or she wants raises can put it down so that we can discuss it at some point. Thank you so much for listening to me.